Welcome back on the AM show. We start with our big stories, and indeed, it's a big one we're kickstarting matters with. The race to lead the governing New Patriotic Party is getting keener by the day. So far, two contenders, former Trades Minister Alan Kyerematen and former Agric Minister Akufo-Addo, have resigned from their ministerial positions to concentrate on the contest ahead. How will all of this work out for a party seeking to break the eight? Our guest this morning is a former scribe of the New Patriotic Party. He joins us for a conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, Ghana, I give you Nana Ohene Ntow. A very good morning to you, sir.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us on the AM show.
I'm happy to be here too.
I don't even know where to start. There's so much to digest, but this is what we're going to do. We're going to spend some time talking about some general issues of concern, the party, the country, and from there, we'll have a focus for an extensive period on the candidacy of Alan Kyerematen.
And I thought that was the real issue. Why?
Oh yes, most definitely. And that's why I'm saying we're going to have extensive conversations on that. And why you're in his camp.
Why?
Yes, I mean, we'll get into that. What is it about Alan Kyerematen that stands out for you? He's not the only one. Nine contenders so far from, we've not heard from the vice president officially yet, but everyone, the suggestion is that he will be there. We're looking at Akufo-Addo. We are looking at the energy minister, Matthew Opoku-Prempeh, likely Kennedy Japan. All of them are in there. Why him? Well, let's start off the conversation with some lighter matters. The bit about Meek Mill. Did you follow that? The video?
Well, I didn't follow until my son brought it up, and I looked at it and I said, "Oh, I'm sure this must be Photoshop." That was my first word. He said, "Oh, Daddy, no." I said, "Are you sure? Let's look at it again." So he brought it and I looked at it, and I was quite surprised, and I was like, "How did he get there? And how did he get the permission?" And this is probably the highest security entity that you can think about. So those were the issues that, but frankly, I did not believe that it was real until my son said, "Daddy, look at it again. It is real, it's not Photoshop." So I think it didn't really sit well with me, and I was quite surprised. How did it come about? That was my real issue.
Do you think it was an oversight from some quarters? Some have pointed to the fact that, look, the handlers at the presidency, those who were in charge, heads should roll. Do you think so?
I think so. I think so, because I view it more as a security thing.
A security breach?
Yes. Yes, because this is a place where I was saying, look, if it were the case that the president was doing some function and this young man had been asked to come and entertain the president and his guests, I mean, it would have been okay.
It would have been a different story.
Yeah, of course. I mean, the president can invite any group of artists or performers, and of course, in any of these official or even unofficial functions, you can invite some group of artists, musicians, choirs and so on, and that would be good. But just out of the blue, and I'm wondering, is it for commercial purposes, for the artists? And who would have given the permission?
So it was sort of improper. The prelude to a video that he put out. And then, like you saw, different scenes from the Jubilee House and all of that. And people felt very frustrated about that. Because come to think of it, our local artists have never had that kind of
course, they won't think
access.
They won't think about doing that, because Flagstaff House is not for that purpose. It just doesn't even give us, as a nation, a good image. So I am not surprised that our local artists have never thought about it. They shouldn't. There are all manner of places. If you are lucky, if you are fortunate, and the president is doing something and he invites you to come and perform, and you get that background, that one, you are lucky. But to take it on a purely commercial, I don't know. I just, so.
Interestingly,
I don't want to spend too much time.
No, definitely not. Like I said,
we'll
discuss other issues, but extensively, about some 30 to 40 minutes, we're going to be talking about the Alan campaign and what all of that means. But so we saw a Kenyan politician, Winnie Odinga, actually post. She's a member of parliament, from what I hear. This Meek Mill Ghanaian story is just, well, she says, nuts. Basically crazy. Shooting a music video at the president's office while rapping, and she uses words that we cannot use.
Wow.
On the presidential podium of the first African nation to gain independence is wild. And Nkrumah must be rolling in his grave, if I may add that. So that was how far this.
I'm not surprised the Kenyan MP is expressing this kind of sentiment. I'm not surprised.
Let's take a quick look at the NPP's leadership. We'll eventually get to, but when you look at the NPP's leadership, even as we contemplate the economy and all that, you would notice that definitely we have a new guard at post administratively, and same for the NDC. When you look at the pairings, so look at the likes of Esiedun Ketia as chairman, Fifi Kwete as general secretary. We have the vice chair people. We have Joseph Yamin organizing, among others. Then you look on the other side, the NPP, your party, and you have Ayensu Tim, who is now chairperson of the party. You have JFK, Justin Frimpong Kodia, or Kodia Frimpong. I think it's Kodia Frimpong, but it's been switched just to fit. And you look at the new crop, John Boydu bowed out and all of that. Some have said that the other side, the NDC side, has an edge. Do you believe that?
In terms of the
in terms of the persons, in terms of their experience. Look at Esiedun Ketia and how long, donkey years, he's been general secretary. Fifi Kwete back then, propaganda secretary. And even in the 90s, what he was doing for the NPP, the NDC, I beg your pardon. And others will say, oh, JFK just came into the picture. But I heard something recently from JFK. He said, I am dangerous, particularly because they've not seen what I can do. So how do you assess, when you look at both sides, what do you see?
Well, first of all, now that you brought it up, let me congratulate the new leadership of NPP, the national chairman, Mr. Stephen Ayensu Tim, and then Justin Kodia, the general secretary, and the other executives. For the chairman in particular, you know, Stephen Tim has always had his eyes on this role.
He's a long-time contender.
Oh, yeah. And he had even worked as the first vice.
Yes, at a point.
National chairman. You understand? So that would tell you that he has always been in the leadership of the party. After he lost his bid to be chairman for the first time in 2005, he never relented. He continued to push and contest and push until right now he won the last election. So I want to congratulate him. And you would see that this is a man who, apart from being at the national helm, even after he had lost the bid for national chairmanship, Mr. Tim had continued to actively support the entire structure of the party. I mean, at some point, not many of us will have the resources to be able to provide a vehicle for every single regional secretariat across the country, providing stationery for almost every constituency office in the national, and in so many other areas. So I think he's a very experienced person, very committed to the cause of this party. And I have no doubt that he will do a good job. And again, he's a man who has a very calm demeanor. And if you look at him, you might
deceptive?
Just... Pardon?
Is that deceptive? Because others look at the very energetic posturing of Esiedun Ketia and how he wants to get into every nook and cranny. And put that side by side with him and say, oh, this is a no fight.
I would come to that. You see, this is a man who has built a very strong business base for himself. Very successful businessman. Now, if anybody can take a challenging area as business and be able to make so much of it personally and build himself in that respect, at the same time run also as a politician, obviously this person knows what he's about. This is a person who thinks very deeply, is very perceptive, and can get things done. So that's okay to talk about people who may be firebrand, if you like, but there are politicians in this country, they were never seen as firebrand. They got the chance to lead this country, and we saw the results. So
I mean, we can, even on that same trajectory, we can look at former President Akufo.
Right.
Serving and everything.
Even in
pretty,
NPP,
pretty quiet.
People felt,
In fact, when I heard him come up at the time, I felt he was going to lose. I was looking at some of the names that popped up. But he did win.
So that one per se, you can't just say there's a person who's calm and therefore is a negative. It can never be a negative at all. Two, you're talking about the Siedun Ketia. The Siedun Ketia is all over the place and he's been in the business for a long time. And
he's won elections, he has lost elections.
Yes, and I concede, and that is right. You're talking about his demeanor and personality, he's more like a firebrand type. Fifi Kwete is almost like that. I mean, seriously, if you know Fifi.
Yeah.
So you put a firebrand chairman and a firebrand general secretary. So I'll pack that. That one you can do your analysis later on.
Okay.
We have had situations in the NPP where the chairman was very strong and assertive. The general secretary, very strong and assertive. And there were some issues.
Okay.
So when you have, if you like, a contrasting pair, like Stephen Tim and Kodia, who's also a strong young person, professional, has been with the NPP students movement, the TESCON, all of his years. I mean, he knows he is coming as a young man, but having grown through the party youth system, he knows the party very well.
He may know the party structures, but that is, again, the vibrancy, that carry-along feel. I get the picture you're painting. Yeah. Maybe a little pretty hard, a bit soft to get that counterbalance. Yes. But in this instance, what even the academics say is you have two softies in there. And again, when you look at, you mentioned Fifi Kwete and how vibrant he is. Isn't it a mismatch when you look at him going toe-to-toe with, on different issues with JFK?
It depends on what you're looking for. I think that we are having to go away from the politics of macho thinking to politics of issues, strategy, delivery. So I don't think that just being a certain kind of firebrand personality is it. Right. And that is basically all you need, or that's mainly what you need. So you would have to look at these persons from a broader perspective of their personalities, their professional backgrounds, the things they've already done, and then their roles in the party over the years. So I don't think that just talking about a softie and a macho is enough. No, I don't think so. I don't think so.
When you look at where Ghana is currently, we're in the second term of President Akufo-Addo, in his third year, actually. So there's just 1 year more to go. Well, if you're not counting 2023. Yeah. What do you see? What do you make of the story, the Akufo-Addo story? Recently, I was reading an article by one Yawan Sako, and to paraphrase, because I do not have here what he said, but he says, if we had not had Akufo-Addo as president, we would have always said that he was the best president we never had. But in this instance, we have seen him in action, and it is nothing to write home about. I think
nothing to write home about. Is
that basically, let me just get the quote here. Yes, so here's what he says. Had Akufo-Addo never become president, there would have been no doubt in minds like mine that he would have made a great president. But he became president, and now we're utterly baffled at what we see. And he goes on and on. So this is just a little... No. There are other parts I can quote for you. But how do you respond to this in terms of breaking the eight? Maybe even before you get there. How would you assess Akufo-Addo as a president? We had John Ejekum Kufuor from your party, red, white, blue, representing your party. Yes. Of course, from the NDC's end, we've had Rawlings, we've had Atta Mills, we've had Mahama. How well do you feel Akufo-Addo has represented the NPP as leader of this country?
I think that when Akufo-Addo took over, everybody would remember that the country was in serious economic difficulty. Incidentally, it's funny, but anytime especially from Kufuor's time and now, anytime the NPP is entering government in the Fourth Republic, the situation will be so bad, you are basically starting from a hole. This is what Kufuor came to meet, and Kufuor had to battle things out from a hole. Maybe some people would remember, others may not. Similarly, by the time Akufo-Addo took over, we're basically in the same kind of situation. So you are working out of a hole to try and fill a hole, build a platform before you can even rebuild the foundation. Very difficult situation. So if you don't put it in that perspective and you jump to a certain conclusion, you will be making a very serious mistake. Now, when Akufo-Addo was campaigning, he put out a flagship program, Free SHS.
Right.
And how did Ghanaians jump for this? This was the deepest, one of the deepest desires of hearts of families and parents. Millions of children cannot go to school for financial reasons and for so many other reasons. Of course, people have criticized Free SHS. Yes, I agree, there have been some difficulties. You probably even need to review the whole program. But just remember the euphoria and the excitement with which Ghanaians greeted that, and on that basis and on the basis of other major critical programs that President Akufo-Addo, then candidate Akufo-Addo, put out, and Ghanaians received. We have seen the government implementing Free SHS to a very large extent. We have seen a lot of the difficulties, we have seen the potential and the future. And obviously, I don't think that at any time from now, any government will come in this country and say, there are difficulties with Free SHS, so therefore I'm scrapping it and I'm going back. All you can do
I think
say,
administrations have said, and people have said time and again
then
it is how we're doing it. In
exactly.
2008,
so
for example, people have said that the
look,
Kenyan example where day students were paying 23% of the fees, boarding students were just getting a little subsidy and all of that. All of those could be looked at. I don't think anyone has come out, whether from CSOs or the former administration, to say it is a bad thing.
Exactly.
So I agree with you.
So that's what I'm saying. You cannot scrap it, so you have to look at it again and see how you can tweak. For example, I would have suggested that there are families and parents who could pay. If we have a proper census, what you want to do with some of these interventions is to help more the vulnerable. So putting it across. But other persons will say, listen, we're all Ghanaians. We all have a right to the national cake. So whether I can pay or not, it is my right. The government puts this out. So we can look at some of those things. But it is one policy that
should we be looking? Have we got to those crossroads where we actually should be looking?
Oh yes, I think so. I think so.
You think we should be looking at?
We need to review Free SHS, but we cannot roll back. We just have to go forward.
Roll back, I don't think.
We can't.
I mean, we started.
It won't be a good idea at all.
And I feel it's a good place to go.
Yes. But it's a major thing.
So you're intimating.
Now, you see, when people, of course, especially the opposition, I say especially, it's not only the opposition. There are some NPP top people who have also been critical of some aspects of the government's performance, especially with the economy and the most recent developments. Those have brought a lot of very critical comments about the performance of the economy and the government.
Right.
I would not say that the criticisms are wrong. They are not wrongly placed because, especially with the current haircut and all of those things, a lot of people are affected and definitely people will react. So those ones, I would urge the government, the president, to take a critical look at it. If there is any way out, to relook at it, especially in terms of the demands of the IMF, maybe we would have to take a critical look, because seriously speaking, where your currency goes down because the support of your currency is getting weaker and weaker, inflation is rising higher and higher.
Inflation has now hit 54.1%.
I mean, those definitely,
it's still going up. Last year, at a point, our currency was the worst in the world. It came to third in the world, and I think fourth or fifth in Africa. But it really didn't look good. And inflation is also going up. But right before we continue with the economy, I just wanted to find out from you. You paint the picture then that Akufo-Addo took over at the time when there was a crisis, so to speak.
Basically.
And so that has impacted his administration,
throughout.
Right?
It's been there. You're trying to deal with very fundamental issues. And introducing new major transformational policies which require so much resources.
Transformational policies. So we have 1D, 1F, planting for food and jobs, rearing for food and jobs, among other things. But to look at it holistically, which administration in the last 40 years plus has come and not faced some crises, plural, of some sorts? They have always, even going back to the 80s and Rawlings and the coups and everything, there were crises. Then we shifted to democratic rule, 1992. There were crises, so many of them. I remember at the time, rural electrification, for example, was a big problem. Education. Look, we've always had crises. When the NDC took over again in 2008, when Akufo took over, there were obviously economic challenges. We went HIPIC, we did everything we had to. We got debt forgiveness. All of that happened. 2008, Atta Mills came through. They had their own issues. At a point in time, Doomso was a big issue. It resulted in so crises we've always had at some point as a developing, economy. Is that any excuse?
Yeah, but you see, when you talk about those crises, you are also not saying that they did not have an impact on the government's performance, any one of these governments that you're talking about, and that by the time that they left, we still didn't have some crisis on our hands.
Perhaps what I'm saying is it's not a valid excuse. When you take over, when you take over, and especially with the rhetoric of Akufo-Addo, who said we have the men and we are in a hurry, we are coming to do it.
I wouldn't use the word excuse. I would use perspective. You would have to put it all in perspective and then judge. No government can come and give Ghanaians excuses. We don't want that. But of course, if you want to rate any government, it is important to look at the context and the perspective within which the government took office and how that would have impacted. I, for example, would have wished, especially again about free SHS, and the sheer quantum of money and resources that you need to implement it the way we introduced it. I would have wished that we had gone about it a different way. But we have introduced it. It is a very great transformational policy. Now we are hard up. We are strained. So what will be the creative ways of taking a second look at it in addition or in relationship to other development-oriented policies? So as for crisis, yes, but nobody can discount difficulties of this nature and say that the government should still go on this way and that way, irrespective of, it becomes a bit difficult.
Are the crises Akufo-Addo inherited worse than the crises that, let's not even stretch to beyond the Fourth Republic, worse than the crises that other administrations from Rawlings to Kufuor to Atta Mills, Mahama have faced? Would you say in comparison
as for
he's
Rawlings,
had worse?
As for Rawlings, Rawlings in particular, if you bring Rawlings into the picture, it becomes a very skewed picture because Rawlings was the one who had reigned 11 years of so-called revolutionary rule, and he himself took over. So if there was a crisis 10 years before he came, we can look at it in terms of himself, and then another 8 years. So Rawlings is quite a peculiar factor.
I understand what you mean.
Yes, Rawlings is quite a peculiar factor. So indeed, if you talk about the Fourth Republic, you see, I wouldn't even want to go back into the past because a lot of the things that Rawlings did, the 11 years of revolutionary government, are still impacting our society today. They are still impacting our economy today.
But the good things he did are also impacting our society today, right?
So you see, that's why I'm saying, let us.
So it's a continuum both ways.
It is a continuum. It is a continuum. So when you come and deal with your situation, let us judge the government based on the context in which the government also took office. And I think on infrastructure, we have done fairly well. On health, we have done fairly well. The government has introduced this major, again, transformational program of Agenda 1.1 and having a district hospital of a certain standard.
Practically nothing has taken off.
Well, it's taking off because it's big.
And recently, former President Mahama took on, and there was talk about whether it was 4 years or 2 years. But again, like we're entering the electoral cycle. Yes. And you know what happens in that period. And the inability to mob up funds, and especially when you're going to the IMF. That is a very
everything
tricky spot.
eventually stops. And I understand that. So, but I'm saying that on balance, especially from where the government took off, I would say that the government has had difficulties, let me admit, but has also had some strong points.
On that note, let me ask you, so in terms of credibility, in terms of what was said and what is being done, in terms of the deliverables, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate the performance of Akufo-Addo's administration?
A lot of criticism that our government has had is that the promises appear to have outweighed the delivery. I think that is a fair criticism,
Okay.
And that NPP as a party should look at it. We still have another 1.5 years, if you like. We are in such critical difficulties with the IMF, but there are things that governments can always do to send a signal.
Right.
I would wish that, in spite of whatever the criticisms are, fair or malicious, I think the government should critically look at 1 or 2 things that we can do to send a signal to Ghanaians that do not forget where we've come from, don't forget some of the key flagship programs that we have delivered.
Right.
But as we wind up as a government for this term, this is what we can also initiate or propose for Ghanaians going forward. I don't think that because a government has had some difficulties, especially in the last couple of months, maybe up to the last couple of 2 years, 1.5 to 2 years, then that period alone should be the period on which the government should be scored. I don't think that would be fair.
What then would be your holistic score, looking at all the variables, the pluses, the minuses, the crises?
I wouldn't want to do the scaling in terms of 1 to 10, but let me say that I think criticism of the government's promises against delivery, that there had been much more promises than delivery, maybe it is fair. But the government also took off on the platform of a very difficult economic environment. And within that context, I think it's fair.
They also inherited some boons when it comes to the economy. There are always pluses and minuses.
Of course.
Quite a number of boons.
I agree with you, but I will still say that the difficulties the government inherited so far.
In fact, it has been said that this administration has got more than any other administration in terms of funds pouring in terms of our oil and all of that within this period. So, I mean, the pluses in terms of what the government has got, even on the back of COVID-19 and what we got comparatively, has been there.
I agree with you, but I'm still saying that maybe what we need to do, if we need to do this analysis, is to get the real data. I mean, if you had informed me that we needed to do this, then I probably would have brought you some. Then I can give you a 1 to 10 score that you're talking about.
I understand. So let's right before we get into Alan, go into what Alan Kyerematen is doing, and again, why you're even pitching camp. Why? I am interested because there are so many contenders. You decided to pitch camp with him.
Suppose
yes, but there are reasons, right?
Yeah,
there are reasons, valid reasons. I'll get into that. But very, very quickly on this, because we may not be able to get back to it. Again, on the economy, let's just spend about 1.5 minutes on this. There's the debt exchange program, the domestic debt exchange, and rarely would you see both sides of parliament coming into, in agreement like that. Some have said that it is because they themselves have invested their ex-gratia and other things in bonds, so they are going to be hard hit. We heard the majority leader say that this is going to wipe out the middle class. You've seen all the furore about it. And then there's this bit about breaking the 8. Just quickly, what do you make of the domestic debt exchange, which some say is being foisted down the throats of Ghanaians and is going to really hurt us economically? And generally, how do you think the economic crisis is going to affect the breaking of the 8? Briefly on that.
So about the domestic debt exchange, I think as far as I can think back, this is probably one of the most difficult policies that any Ghanaian government has introduced on the economic front, especially in the Fourth Republic. A policy that affects people's savings, people's investments, people who don't owe the government, having to bear the cost of government's debt. I think that is a very difficult one. And if you ask me, I would have wished that the government would not touch individual domestic investments, savings, because that goes to the core of people's lives and daily living. I heard the story of one lady who said, look, even if I'm not going to get the interest, you give me my principal back. So they were hoping, people were hoping that at least it won't touch. It seems like, I don't know the details technically yet, I don't know all the details, but from the discussion that is going on, it appears it might even affect your principal. That one becomes really difficult. And looking at the sensitivity of it, I think NPP ought to be very, very cautious. The government...
And it's interesting why I pose that question, because the middle class usually is the group
the base that
votes for the NPP.
I know.
And so if the middle class is going to take such a hit, as some would say, up to about 80% of the value of what they have...
It's a difficult... Look, I don't know what the timelines are. The last time I heard the president, I think he was saying the IMF discussions are going to end by the end of February. We still have a bit of time. The IMF is also a human institution. And I think that bit of the domestic debt, government has to take a look at it again. Look, before you even, I'm sure you might bring it up, it goes back to the issue of the finance minister. If you ask me, I'll tell you the finance minister has come to the end of his wits in terms of providing some new creative solution. It is possible within NPP to find somebody who would also come up with some radically new idea to help you get out of this crisis. Maybe, I've never talked about this matter, the president should consider the calls that our MPs and other well-meaning Ghanaians are making for the resignation of Ken Ofori-Atta.
You're saying President Akufo-Addo should consider the calls
I think he
for the
should
resignation
consider
of
those
Akufo-Addo.
calls, because, you see, we have the men, and you said so. So are we saying that we can't find anybody within the NPP who can come up with some new idea? Everybody plateaus. Everybody gets tired. Everybody gets to the point where diminishing returns sets in.
Right.
And I, personally, if you ask me, I think Ken Ofori-Atta has gotten to that point where diminishing returns has set in. Let's face it.
There's not much more he can
I don't
offer.
think so.
And with
But
all the
anyway,
baggage, he probably would do the party good.
But again, it is the president's constitutional prerogative.
Right.
I cannot insist too much, but it is possible. We could find some new,
but
fresh...
promises have been made to the members of parliament. Let him complete this. Let him see us through the IMF program.
But now,
let's go through the budget.
Now we are in the middle of it, and it looks like some new ideas are not coming forward. So I don't know. Well, maybe up to the... But I am saying it is possible. You can find somebody fresh. It will surprise you what that person might introduce, which would even shock the IMF and say, look, oh, so you had this kind of... I don't know. But that's for that.
If off the top of your head, you had to proffer one or two people who could very well, man our economy,
I wouldn't offer...
Who would you mention?
I wouldn't proffer that suggestion.
Dr. Esibe, who was the head
I've
of
heard
the
his
Finance
name
Committee
mentioned.
of Parliament.
He's a very sharp...
I mean, I spoke to him at a point
He's a
last
very,
week
very
and asked him
chap.
if you were asked to do it, and he says he would offer himself.
Esibe is a very brilliant chap, and even when he was in Parliament, I didn't have a lot of information about what he did day to day, but I knew, on the whole, he was a key pillar behind the scenes for the economic sector of the government. So obviously, he's one of such names. I don't know, but
let's talk Alan Kyerematen and
which is why you
the
invited
GTP,
me.
And GTP and NATO and all these this talk. We'll check out some of what he's been saying. Why are you rooting for Alan Kyerematen? Why are you pitching camp with him, not with Vice President Bawumia, who likely would be going for the slot, not with Kennedy Ejapon, the Ascent Central Member of Parliament? Why Alan? Why?
Now, this is a very highly democratic party. And from the inception of this party, we've always had presidential primaries. In fact, it has never been the case that one person showed up for NPP presidential primary and went unopposed. It has never happened. So the culture is, the tradition is, the philosophy and the very foundation of NPP as a political party will tell you that at any time there is a slot for any position of leadership, you would have multiple names, people showing interest. And once you have that, you would have party members, party people, supporting this one and supporting that one and supporting that one. Party members and party people have never supported one person across board. So it's part of the culture. So I'm just following the NPP culture. Somebody shows up, another person supports him, Alan shows up, I support him, Osefria Koto shows up, somebody else supports him. That is the culture of this party. So it is not strange at all that I would choose to support Alan Kyerematen. I mean, it's just part of the natural processes of democracy.
Is Alan Kyerematen the best option for the NPP going into election?
That one, I would say, that's what I think. These are all people who qualify, people who all have certain backgrounds. But now you are talking about what are we going even to tell the electorate going forward? I've always said that what NPP does internally, especially in terms of electing a presidential candidate, electing a parliamentary candidate for a general election, is not simply for the purposes of internal elections. It is for the purposes of general elections. Now, when you look at the profile of Alan, within the party, Alan has served this party so well as a party member, right from scratch. Alan has been a member of this party, one of the founding members of the party, one of the leaders of one of the most important groupings, organs of this party, the Young Executives Forum.
Right.
Now, when you go to that point, people tend to forget where this party has come from and how its beginnings and its genesis has contributed to where it is today. Because if you didn't have that history, if you didn't have that foundation, there wouldn't be any NPP today, or that too. There would have been a different kind of NPP, which wouldn't have been as strong as it is today. All of your strength as a person, as an institution, as an organization, as a nation, depends very much on your antecedents, your roots, your foundation. And Alan is one of the persons who contributed so immensely to building that strong foundation.
When you say contributed immensely, are you talking of the cash element, which is his alias, actually?
Oh, yeah, it was. It was part of it.
He wouldn't be the only one, because Kennedy Japan has recently come out.
Yeah, but we're talking
Dr.
about
Dr. Makluk took a swipe at him. He came out and...
You're asking me about Alan, so let me just focus.
Right.
As a president of the Young Executives Forum, when Professor Dubois became the candidate, NPP as a party was in serious financial difficulties. Why? Jerry Rawlings, who had come as a revolutionary leader, had systematically and deliberately destroyed all the key financial pillars of NPP. And for that matter...
How did he do that?
I will show you. Rawlings announced on television, and I heard it myself, and I saw it myself, that Ghanaians should not buy Apia Menka's Apino soap. Because if they bought it...
I remember the soap. I don't know about it.
And he gave reasons that if Ghanaians bought it, Apia Menka will get money to go and do politics and come and overthrow government. So Ghanaians should not put money in Apia Menka's hands. Rawlings had destroyed Dr. Addison. Rawlings had destroyed Dr. Akufo-Addo. In fact, in the case of Akufo-Addo, Rawlings drove an armored car to the factory at Kwamo, close to Kumasi. It was a pharmaceutical manufacturing company, and commanded that the factory should shut down. The factory was in process. They switched off everything. Everything froze. Dr. Akufo-Addo never got back on his feet. J. Kufuor's own businesses had collapsed. Kreku and a whole lot of them. So by the time NPP came in after the lifting of the ban.
To be fair as well, these are things you're saying, but we may not have all the evidence to back.
This is historical. That's why I'm saying it on public media.
Some of these things are said.
Wait. I'm very mindful.
I'm also looking at the other side, because I don't have all the facts.
Can you allow me, because I'm a journalist too, and I was working in the media.
Right.
I covered the trial of Akufo-Addo, that he had taken a loan from Africa Development Bank, not Ghanaian Bank, Africa Development Bank, and that he hadn't paid. Africa Development Bank hadn't come demanding the loan. And he was investing it in his business. He was a medical practitioner and also an investor. He was put on trial for taking a loan. He hadn't defaulted. He was still running the loan with the bank. Rawlings said no. It was for purely political reasons. So if you want the details, I can give you. Maybe some of you were much younger. So I'm saying that at the point that NPP came into the Fourth Republic, most of their pillars financially were flat.
Is that where Alan came in?
It fell on the young executives. Alan and that big group. Kandapa was part of the group.
Albert Kandapa.
Yeah, exactly.
The National Security Minister.
He was.
Right.
Late a whole lot of Kwabra Japan, a whole lot of them came together. These were the group of young professionals and business people who were rough and tough and strong financially. And when it mattered most, they were the people. YEF was the group that bought a vehicle for Professor Dubois' campaign.
Okay.
Yes.
So in other words, Alan in that
and from
aspect
that point,
has paid his dues.
Until now, yes.
Right.
So for that reason, I will support him.
Okay. You've given me good reason for backing him up. Let's get into some of what he's been saying now, though. He talks about a number of things, and some people have asked, why now? And you've been part of this administration. But let's listen to Alan Kyerematen in that latest address he gave to the nation.
If by the will of God and through your goodwill, I'm voted first as the flag bearer of the NPP and subsequently as president of the Republic in the next general elections, I will become the transformational leader of our time, who will build on the foundations that have been laid by successive leaders of our nation over the last 65 years. To achieve this strategic goal of transforming our dear country to become the shining star of the new Africa, I will, as president, launch and lead the execution of the Great Transformational Plan, GTP of Ghana, which will span the period 2025 to 2030. The post-COVID economic recovery program, currently being implemented with the anticipated support from the IMF from 2023 to 2025, will be a transitional economic program leading to the rollout of this great transformational plan. The arrogance of power has been a major obstruction to progress in our country. People in positions of authority must understand that leadership is an opportunity to serve the people and not to lord over them. In servant leadership, humility is an asset and not a weakness.
Alan Kyerematen, who wants to be flag bearer of the NPP there. Let me come back into the studio. So he has a 7-point plan, the 7-point agenda. But we've always had, for example, some of the things he talks about. The National Development Planning Commission. Sometime last year, I spoke with the head of that institution. And Alan himself has been thrust, so to speak, both during the Kufuor era and the Akufo-Addo era, in a crucial ministry, trades and industry, under which the flagship program, 1D1F, fell. And with some of what he's been talking about, the private sector and all of that, people ask, but Alan, what have you done when you've been charged with 1D1F? From that standpoint of his rhetoric, what is new, so to speak?
First of all, let's look at the record of Alan in government as you connect it to 1D1F. And what you say, people are saying, I don't know whether you say 1D, 1F has not succeeded or not, but you see...
Has it?
Alan has been in government...
Let's look
I'll
at that.
come to that.
Has 1D, 1F succeeded?
I'll come to that. Alan has been in government before, and we saw his performance under Akufo. Same ministry. But even before then, before Alan became Minister of Trade and Industry under Akufo, Alan had been ambassador of Ghana to the US. Right. Now, when Alan was ambassador, he initiated a lot of discussions with the US government on what we now have as AGOA and the program to deepen our trade relationship with the United States. Again, Alan was the one who actually, when I heard about this, I was quite baffled because I had the opportunity to go to Washington, D.C. People wanted to raise issues about Alan and try and smear him in connection with some of these same internal contests and so on. And then the NDC also latched onto it, that Alan had caused financial loss to the state by selling a certain property that Ghana had in the US and buying another for the embassy. And that this was a waste and this was this and that. So I went there. And I visited Ghana's ambassador's residence in the Potomac district of Washington, D.C. And I was told by Ambassador Odusei Bewa, who was then ambassador, that this is the place Alan bought for Ghana. And I said, but I thought they said Alan caused financial loss to the state by this transaction. He said, you know, people talk about these things when they don't even know what is going on. They're just interested in the propaganda and they pick it up. If today Ghana even decided to sell that property in the Potomac district of Washington, D.C., and get another property in a fairly good area still in Washington, I'm sure they will have 2 or 3 more properties. So this is a person, I think, has a very far-sighted view of things. Sometimes, when you are like that, others who may not have the same perspective of life will have some difficulties with you. You might be thinking way ahead, and then we want to think about here and now, we would have some difficulties too. Alan coming into President Kufuor's government, trade and industry, it was President Kufuor's initiative, actually supported basically by Alan. In fact, once it is the president, you don't want to shift the emphasis onto the minister, but PSIs under Alan, garments, salt, oil palm, cassava. Up until this day that I speak to you, some of the industries are having difficulties as a result of the general economic difficulties. But these are aspects of the program that Alan initiated then, which are still today thriving. Oil palm, cassava. Guinness is taking cassava from Ayensu starch and other sources as part of their major raw material for production of beer today. And people talk about the starch initiative having failed. And they haven't checked with Guinness. They haven't checked what's going on.
But does Guinness alone make it a success?
So isn't it good enough for you to
I'm not saying that it is not good, but does that alone make it a success?
But I'm talking about that. I'm talking about AGOA and the garment initiative. I'm talking about salt, that initiative today. Salt has opened up a new vista for economic investment. And it started from somewhere. People were doing salt.
The electrochem situation, or which one?
I'm not talking about particular companies. I'm talking about that whole shift and focus on salt. There are people who are even in the media gurus, who are now investing big time in salt production. It's all part of that initiative that was put out by Alan, supported by President Kufuor at the time. So if you look at this person, again, he comes into President Akufo-Addo's government, and then he takes off with the 1D, 1F. As we speak today, the number of jobs that 1D, 1F has created, I'm told in excess of 100,000 or so, direct, indirect.
You see,
the number of factories, the
devil usually is in the detail.
Yes,
when you get into we've been told about watermelon factories, rice factories,
wait a second.
Wale, you go there and there's
wait a second. The president himself, President Akufo-Addo himself, at every opportunity, has talked about the success of the work that Alan Kyerematen, as his minister, has done every opportunity. So are we saying that the president was lying when he says that one of my best performing ministers, look at the 1D, 1F initiative.
The president has also categorized Akufo-Addo as one of his best performing ministers.
But the public is the judge now.
A lot of people
but the public is the judge.
So I'm just using that same benchmark.
Yeah, but if you want to do that, nobody requested or demanded the resignation of Alan Kyerematen, but people have demanded. So I put it in that perspective. So you see, when the president praised Alan, the people on the ground never called for his resignation. And the evidence of his success, I'm telling you, if NPP is going to go into the next election, one of the sectors NPP would find a message to present to Ghanaians, in spite of the difficulties that we are facing now, is that, look, we need an export-driven, agricultural-based, industrializing economy. Otherwise, we will never find the strength to be able to change the face of our economy.
It's interesting.
Jobs, the value of the dollar, and export investment and export earnings. These are one of the key things, some of the key things that would immediately give you assurance and hope that, yes, you can now talk about transformation. Because you see, when you talk about transformation and you start from the service areas, which tend to be sink areas, like health, like education, and you don't focus a lot more on the productive areas, agriculture, industry, export, they may all be good transformational policies, but you need a lot more resources.
You bring up these points because when you look at his 7-point agenda, he talks about these, the primacy of the private sector, and then he would feed that into our work ethic and discipline, and then talk about corruption, petty thievery, and all of that.
And agriculture. He put it, he connected agriculture.
He puts all of them together. But when you look at the private sector, really, the private sector is on its knees now in many ways because of the economic downturn. It's the same private sector he's speaking of, and it's the same private sector he has, interacted with over this period. What is going to be different under Alan Kyerematen?
Every president comes with their focus. President Kufuor came with his focus. At that time, the very structure and foundation of the economy was totally broken. So President Kufuor focused on macroeconomic restructuring, and then also focused on some social initiatives like national health insurance and free maternal child care and so on. But his key focus was the economy was not just on its knees, flat on its belly, to the extent that President Kufuor had to boldly declare HIPIC and get some relief in order for the economy to get back. And in that respect, President Kufuor was able to rebuild the foundation. That was his focus. He succeeded to a very large extent. President Akufo-Addo came with free SHS. Now, if a president announces his focus and tells the cabinet that now this is my focus, we have all these other sectors, but my focus strategically is education, free SHS. So, Finance Minister, I want 30%, 40% of all of our earnings to be invested in free SHS. Obviously, resources are going to be made available to whoever is managing that sector, much more, even though all other sectors will be getting their resources. Alan comes and says that my focus, should you, my good friends and family members, NPP, make me the candidate, and the good people of Ghana consider me, looking at my record from MPTEC, when I was not even in government, my focus was the private sector. And I have built quite a number, I don't need to come and mention names here, a number of private sector businesses across this country, in other African countries. Even when Alan was not a minister, was not even in government, he was already, his business, his own business for livelihood was building the private sector or helping to build the private sector. He came in government, we saw him in trade, his interactions with the private sector and all of that. So now he says, look, if I am president, I have shown you from the track record of my own career as a private person, as a government minister, that as for the private sector, it is probably the dearest to my heart. as for trade policy, as for industrialization policy. Alan has been an advisor and a consultant of the UN for a number of African countries on trade, industry,
and we know of that record.
Exactly.
It's so interesting.
So when Alan tells you that my focus, the primacy of my policy will be private sector, it's not new.
My only concern, my only, I don't want to call it pessimism, but the private sector, yes, even at the tail end of the Rawlings administration, there was a bit of a push. I get it. From the start, it was problematic.
Private sector.
At the tail end, there was that. You cannot take that away from him. Akufo-Addo drove that.
Exactly.
Atta Mills came in, also pushed that agenda.
Yes.
Mills, Mahama also came in, did his bit, and now we have Akufo-Addo. Nothing much has changed. And the point is this. All the countries that we were rubbing shoulders with back then, the Malaysias, the Indonesias, and even India back then when we gained independence comparatively, have moved on the back of industrialization. We have had all the talk, and maybe that is why Alan Kyerematen talks about NATO, no action, talk only.
You answered that question.
But he himself, has he done much in that regard?
So much. I'm surprised that in spite of the history of Alan's personal passion.
I mean, it's become like a mantra now. They all say it, but nothing
I'm not talking about they all. I'm saying how many of the politicians that we're looking at, whether NPP or NDC, have for their lifetime been so focused and committed to helping the private sector of Ghana develop and build, training and reorganization, helping private businesses from MPTech Ghana to MPTech Africa. This one went even beyond Africa, and the United Nations recognized it. UNDP and UNCTAD recognized Alan's role in helping to focus and strengthen the private sector. Now, I tell you, you're talking about presidents that have come, everybody has done their bit. In fact, as I sit here, I can remember the focus of President Akufo. I know the focus of President Akufo-Addo. I don't even remember the focus of John Mahama. So maybe you can also help me. Presidents come, and everything that the president will do, the government will do.
In terms of what? The
strategy for every government will pick at least one or two areas.
The Mahama administration focused on infrastructure, roads. You need that for your economy.
So here we
healthcare. You spoke about those when you started.
And all of them.
All that infrastructure.
Yes, you say all of them focus on something. They all talk about something. By the time John Mahama left, can we say that our road infrastructure was out of the woods? We can't. Even though
can we say that it was as bad as before?
Of course not. Of course not. So, but I'm saying simply that when someone is in the seat as the number one person, is different from being, I dare say, a mere president.
So you're basically telling me that Alan Kyerematen, if he is president, will be somehow different from Alan Kyerematen as a trade minister.
See, but you see, that is even the more reason why John Mahama, for example, should not be contesting presidency at all again. Why? He's been vice president before. He's been president before. We are not even asking what is John Mahama going to bring, which is extraordinary. But we need a president anyway after Akufo-Addo. Nobody can say that NPP and NDC, they've been here before, so they cannot or they don't have a right to put up a candidate. NPP is in government, they will still put up a candidate. NDC was in government before, they put up candidates.
Would it then be fair with that analogy, though I'm shifting from Alan Kyerematen a bit, the Vice President, Dr. Mahamudu Bawumia, some have taken him on that, I mean, he's failed to deliver on many scores, especially in terms of where we find ourselves economically. Would you say then that he too, I mean, using the same line of reasoning, should even be putting himself forward to be flag bearer of your party? And if your party voted for him, I mean, what would that mean?
The issue of the vice president, when it comes to the internal thing again, sometimes people are oversensitive. But I think sometimes too we should be a little objective, even about our own things. Now, incidentally, it's so funny, but incidentally, a lot of times when people complain about the economy under our government now, they talk much less about President Akufo-Addo, and they talk much more about the vice president. That one, I'm sure you're in the media, so you would have heard. So a lot of the bashing that people have had against our current government in terms of the economy has been directed at the vice president. And if you hit the streets, you hear a lot of the criticism. As a party person, I would just say that, look, incidentally, the vice president is still also a bit younger than Alan Kyerematen. He has a bit of time. Two, if it is the case that a lot of the criticism that NPP is facing on the economic front, even the president, people don't even talk about him much, the vice president. Now, if you go and put that same face on your ballot paper, and you ask the president, the people, majority of whom are apparently complaining about this person, then it means that you are forcing the people that whether they like it or not, they should vote. So you look at the perception, you look at the vibes, you look at the... So I would suggest that in that same vein, and I do agree with the principle that I set, I would say that maybe the vice president should recede a little bit for now, spend some time, and then that criticism, oh, you have always been the chairman of the EMT. People say, but Alan was a member. Yes, you're a member, you're not chairman. You're not vice president. You're not in that position. So some of these issues, but that would be my suggestion. Of course, nobody can stop anyone who has an ambition.
So for you, yes, democratically speaking, we all have that level playing field, so to speak.
I am sure that the criticism that I used
just to get it clear,
John Mahama, I'm sure some people might use it also against...
But you are suggesting that on the back of everything that has happened and the negativity and the perception, the vice president should step aside.
That's what my suggestion is. But
and not contest for the flag bearership.
That is my suggestion. Okay. And it is not... My suggestion is not a decree. Right. And it is only a suggestion.
But aren't you merely saying that because you are in support of someone else from the
Absolutely
other side, a.k.a. Alan Kyerematen?
I think I gave you the perspective, you know. Unless, of course, you don't agree with me.
So you feel wholly, roundly, Alan Kyerematen is a better candidate for the NPP going into election 24 than Dr. Mahamudu Bawumia?
But Dr. Bawumia is not the only one who is showing interest. So there are others. So it's not just him.
I get it, but most people will tell you that the front runners are your candidate and the vice president.
But it is still a broad basket with other names showing up. My choice, my preference is Alan. I've given you a bit of reason why I think Alan is the best.
Two quick matters.
NPP.
Looking at the time we have left. He talks about corruption.
Yes.
And I find it interesting. The finance minister himself, sometime last year or so, mentioned that we lose about $4 billion to corruption every year. Other statistics will peg it at as high as $6 billion plus. Imagine if we had that in our kitty, we probably wouldn't be going to the IMF.
Obviously not.
And he also talks about the arrogance of power. We've moved away from the private sector and developing a GTP and all of that. On these two issues, in about a minute, what exactly is Alan going to do differently? You've seen the reports. Afrobarometer, even last year, a more not perceptive one, realistic one. The Ghana Statistical Service and all of that. How is he going to do this?
Well, of course, I cannot sit here and give you the specific details of what Alan, should he become president, will do. I think what he himself did with the statement was to just give a broad framework so that people will have a sense. Because if you want to contest for the presidency, people should have a sense of, so what new thing, what different thing do you have to offer? So Alan has just tried to do that. So if you ask about corruption, you ask about arrogance of power, he's talking about himself. He said, look, it is clear that one of the things that have bedeviled our society is the arrogance of power, where people feel that once they're in a certain position, and it's not just politicians, I bet you, people in the public sector, people in the judicial system, people in the security systems, the police and so on. I mean, we generally as a people seem to be more interested in the trappings of power rather than delivering the responsibility and obligations of power. Alan says, I'm going to focus not just on the trappings, but on what that power obliges me to deliver. So that in that sense, I will be a leader, a servant leader for you, not just to throw my weight about So if
and you're
he
going
says
to what he says about the arrogance of power.
but that's exactly
that.
what I'm talking about now. He's talking about himself. And really, we cannot deny that we have it in our society.
Alan is said to have lost his... You remember there was a time when President Akufo-Addo said that, look, after me, Alan must come.
Yeah.
And then...
I was there, right there on the spot.
Then, you know, in 2016 and all of that, Alan went ahead to contest again, I mean, before 2016. And some feel with that, he lost that opportunity to continue right after Akufo-Addo. And that, yes, because there was a point where he conceded, look, okay, let Akufo-Addo go.
Yes.
And there was some sort of tacit agreement. And then later, he contended him again ahead of 2016. Some have said that means he lost his opportunity. What is your very quick take on that?
But this one is really awkward because you see, Nana Akufo-Addo, either as candidate or a member of the party or president, is not the one who gives opportunity for anybody to contest. The party constitution decides that whoever feels qualified and whoever will indeed be qualified by the constitution and the party structures may contest.
Right.
So how come some private discussion or some message of goodwill becomes the law that says that since I said
for that we should just leave it to the devil?
Yeah, of course.
What happens if Alan Kyerematen loses? What happens if he loses? And how do you feel about the whole bit about let's have an Alan Bawumia pairing?
Oh, that one, they've asked me several times. I said that is not a realistic proposal.
Why not?
That is not a proposal to be considered. Now, if you look at the party's constitution, the candidate, after being elected, has the constitutional right and privilege to nominate his running mate.
Right.
And then the council endorses it, and then we go. Now, in the case of Nana Akufo-Addo, in 2007, after the primary, 2008, he needed to come up with a running mate. He proposed a name. Most of council members did not support. So then he was not happy, really, but he had to reconsider. Within the period, some members also proposed a name to Nana Akufo-Addo. He didn't like the name. He wasn't happy. There were a lot of backroom discussion. It didn't work. He rejected it. And then enter Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia, who was not even a member of the party at all. So you can imagine what kind of opposition and reaction. So you couldn't find anybody who is a member qualified under our constitution.
You have to go outside the party.
5 years, good standing. So no, yes, no, yes. There was a huge.
So on
fight.
the back of those democratic principles, we should just leave matters.
Wait a second. Yes, wait a second. So then, even when Dr. Bawumia was not a member of the party, after a long discussion, President Akufo said, "Look, the constitution says the candidate has a right.
Right.
So let us consider it for him. After all, when he becomes president." And he's the vice president, he's the one he's going to work closely with personally. So in that respect, apart from the constitutional stuff, when you pre-arrange, what have you done? You are foisting a running mate on whoever becomes the...
So by all means, former President Kufuor who says let the democratic principles
exactly,
go.
And it did work. And then also, and then just to finish off with it, you see, when you do that, now, you have set what I will consider to be a very dangerous precedent, because once it becomes a precedent, why shouldn't anybody in the future, if it suits them, also refer to it?
Let's just have a partner.
Let the Constitution help you. Constitution.
What happens if Alan loses? Would he then be receptive to becoming a vice presidential candidate?
Why would you want to preempt all of that? Leave it to Alan.
No, but is he open to it?
I wouldn't say. I cannot say. And you see, when
you speak for him and you cannot say whether he'd be receptive to it or not.
People seem to want a certain arrangement by all means. That feeling I will reject outright. Why should people just limit it to Alan Bawumia? Let this party be NPP. Let NPP be NPP. Those of us who are in the leadership now of NPP will die and go. Another generation will take over from us. So the things that we do today, I think we should be careful not to think that we are going to be here forever. And so we are setting a precedent that the future generation, whether they like it or not, will have to refer to.
Let's wrap the conversation on the Christian tangent. Two questions put together. Some have said that the flag bearer must be Christian because of the large Christian population in the country, and that if you went for someone who wasn't Christian, and we are not trying to practice religious segregation here, we're just re-echoing what people have said. How do you feel that will work in your party? Do you agree with such a suggestion? Of course, that would also work against non-Christian contenders. And we saw that with Aliu Mahama, if you recall, not necessarily the Christian thing, not necessarily the religious thing,
yes,
but the fact that he was vice president, he was Muslim, contested, and shockingly, fell way off the radar. I think he placed third or fourth. Then there is the National Cathedral Project, also Christian in outlook. Your quick take on these two in just about a minute, if you can.
You see, when these issues come up, I respond to them as a former general secretary, basically focusing on strategic objectives and what will help us achieve that. What is the strategic objective of any political party that goes into election? To win. Whether your votes come from a Christian bloc or a Muslim bloc or an atheist bloc, in that respect, we're not looking at the religious factor. We're looking at, so where do most of the votes come from? And you push your strategy towards that.
But when your population is over 70-something% Christian.
Exactly. So that's what I'm saying. If you are a Christian community, a Christian nation majority, and you've checked the voting patterns of Christians, and you want to win, it's good to show them.
Are you admitting tacitly that it would be not in the interest of the party to vote a non-Christian?
I am saying that I'm looking at
as flag bearer.
I'm looking at it strategically. I gave this analogy.
So it would make sense to vote a Christian as flag bearer for the NPP?
My friend, I am telling you, this is a strategic issue which NPP has to consider. I was telling one of my older friends, a very venerable chief, he raised the same question with me. I said, Nana, so if I am the agent for Bentley or Rolls-Royce or Mercedes, but my hometown is from Ponso, about 12 or so kilometers off the Kumasi Road, before Nkoko. And I say, I want to honor my village compatriot. So I go and put my showroom for Bentley and Rolls-Royce and Mercedes in that village to show them that I love them. I want to honor the village, so I brought my headquarters here, my showroom is here. Who buys Bentleys? They are in the cities. So if you are a businessman who have your eye on the market, you go where the market is most prospective.
Okay.
That's all I can tell.
I thank you for that. The National Cathedral, do we need a National Cathedral right now?
Right now, obviously, the economic situation dictates that we take a second look.
Should we put it on ice for now?
I think so.
We should put it on hold?
I think so, because initially, I don't think that my understanding was that it's going to be funded like from public funds, But if it is going to be funded by public funds, then it's a problem. If it's not going to be funded by public funds...
By and large, it is being funded by public.
That is where the difficulty comes. If it is going to be a public-funded project, then for now, I think we can put it on hold. After all, God says, I don't necessarily live in buildings made with concrete and mortar. I live in the heart.
Made by human hands.
I live in the hearts of people. So if we are truly committed to the Lord in our hearts, and we haven't even built a cathedral, the Lord will still be happy with us.
Nana Inti Ebefana.
Afadada.
Afadada. Alan for all.
Alan for all. Yes.
Nana Ohene Ntow. Thank you for joining us for this conversation. It's been interesting. First time having it.
But you should have alerted me on some of the issues. Then I would have brought some more particulars. But anyway,
we'll remedy that.
It's okay. It's okay.
Hope it was enjoyable for you.
It was okay. Oh yeah. I haven't been in the media space for a long time. People are asking, so why we don't?
It is true.
Yeah. So, at any opportunity, once it is a good one, I would show up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nana Ohene Ntow, of course, is a former General Secretary of the NPP, and he is firmly rooted in the Alan Kyerematen camp. You heard him at the end saying, "Afakrevi, Alan for all." Well, right before we take a break and come to you with more of our big stories, we all know water is life. It regulates your body temperature, keeps you alive and kicking. Well, guess what? Awake is premium purified water treated through a strict purification process to ensure that every bottle in the market refreshes you much better. We have the perfect sizes for all occasions, 330 and 500 ml bottles to fit your pockets and bags. 750 ml for the heavy drinkers, and 1.5 liters for those who always want more. We have also introduced our special 19-liter jars for offices and homes. So all you need to do now is just stay awake with Awake Purified Drinking Water wherever you go. So come on, grab your bottle of Awake Water and get quality, top-notch hydration. Awake Purified Drinking Water, one for life. This is heartwarming. Remember, for every bottle you purchase, an amount is donated to the National Cardiothoracic Center. It's produced by Casapreco. For bulk purchases, just call 0262 351 251. Remember, this advert is FDA approved. When we return, more action on the AM show. Do stay.